Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Very important time in our turnaround efforts for the state of Illinois and for our assistance for the city of Chicago. Time is of the essence. Every day matters. We've got social services that are at risk. We've got vulnerable families who need services who are at risk of not being supported. And we've got Chicago school children that are facing larger class sizes, loss of teachers and important personnel in the school system. And we're also facing a situation where Illinois taxpayers and Chicago taxpayers are facing increasing costs and a dire future unless we act. Time matters. Every day matters. I'm here today meeting with members of the General Assembly who are based in Chicago, encouraging them to move the negotiations forward. We've had many productive, good faith negotiations with the mayor of Chicago, very good discussions with President Cullerton in the Senate, but unfortunately Speaker Madigan and many of the members in the General Assembly that he controls have been unwilling to have any real, true two-way negotiations. And we're asking the members of the General Assembly to please encourage the Speaker to come forward and negotiate in good faith. We're asking the Mayor and President Cullerton to encourage the Speaker to come forward and negotiate. At this point, Mayor Emanuel has made a number of requests of our administration and of the state government to assist the city of Chicago, and there is not a single request that he's made so far that we haven't said that we are willing to pursue and been positively supportive. No request that he's made have we been unwilling to try to implement on the city's behalf. We are eager to help Chicago Public Schools. Many of our most vulnerable families depend on those schools. We're eager to help the city of Chicago. But at this point, the city of Chicago and the mayor have been unwilling to help us in our reform agenda to help the state. And this has got to be a two-way partnership. This has got to be mutual, effective reform. It can't be one way. And we can't make requests upon the state of Illinois and state taxpayers to help Chicago if Chicago is unwilling to help the state help its taxpayers, help its school children, help its recipients of services. This has got to be two-way partnership. Unfortunately, in private, it's a pretty constructive conversation. In public, it's not. We've got to take things to the next level. We are willing to do everything so far that the mayor has asked us to do, but we have got to get reforms for the state as part of it. This is not a one-way partnership. This is a two-way partnership. Now we've heard rumors, I have not had them substantiated, we've heard rumors that the bill that is pending in the legislature to authorize federal funds that can flow through, if the state appropriates them, flows through to our most vulnerable citizens at the state level, purely federal money, not state money. That bill, which I have personally said I will support, and I do support, and that members of the General Assembly also support, that bill is pending. We're now hearing that the Speaker may try to attach an additional piece of legislation to that bill, calling on the state to begin to make payments on behalf of the city of Chicago for their for the Chicago Public Schools into their pensions. Let's be clear. Tying a bill that we've already agreed to, tying that bill onto a piece of legislation that is one-way state bailout of the city of Chicago, unreasonable, just unacceptable. I hope that that rumor is false. We do not want to see that piece of legislation held up. That's just a manipulation of the legislative process. And that bill for federal funds needs to pass so we can help our most vulnerable families in the state of Illinois. So we're asking that the legislature not attach any other bill to that bill. We do want to help the city of Chicago with its pensions. We're willing to do that, but it needs to be done in the overall context of reform. And to be clear, Chicago has asked the state for the types of reforms that we're advocating that the entire state have. Chicago has asked for special treatment. And what we're saying in return is, we'll do things for Chicago, but let's help the whole state reform. The city of Chicago asked back in 2011 to have certain work rules taken out of collective bargaining with the teachers so that a longer school day could be put in place. The state did that because the city knew they couldn't get the teachers to agree to that. The teachers union is too strong. So the state took that out of collective bargaining. And now, right now, the city has requested us to take the teachers' pension payment, the employee portion of the pension payment, out of collective bargaining and force the teachers to pay their employee fair share. Because the city doesn't feel like they can negotiate that with the teachers union. The teachers union is too strong. They won't agree to it. So they want to take it out of collective bargaining and have the state mandate it. That's a special deal for Chicago. Why does Chicago ask the state to take things out of collective bargaining to benefit Chicago, but it doesn't allow the state to authorize all communities, all school districts, to manage collective bargaining as they see fit? This is the critical essence of our reforms. Our school districts, our city governments, our county governments belong to the people in those districts. They belong to local residents, they belong to local voters, they belong to local taxpayers. They don't belong to state government. They don't belong to Speaker Madigan or the legislators he controls. They should be able to control this locally. That's exactly what we're asking for reform in our property tax bill. We're asking to freeze property taxes for 2 years, and as part of that, allow local governments and local school districts to decide what issues get collectively bargained, just like Chicago has already asked to be done, and the state has already done as a special arrangement for Chicago. We're saying let that be the arrangement for all school districts, for all communities. And those school districts and communities that want to collectively bargain everything, terrific. Keep the status quo. If there are certain things that they feel they shouldn't collectively bargain, but should instead decide what's in the best interest of their children or their taxpayers, they should be able to decide that. Simple reform, local control, doesn't mandate any change, it just empowers local voters and local residents. Chicago has already asked for it. We're saying don't do a special thing for Chicago, treat them like everyone else. Now, I've heard some feedback from some of my comments where folks have said here in Chicago, just treat Chicago like everybody else. We don't want a special deal. Treat Chicago like everyone else. Every other district has their pensions paid for, school pensions paid for by the state. That is true. And I've said I'm willing to change the system and have the state start to pay for Chicago pensions. I've said that. However, we need to do that in the context of some reform. What those folks who've criticized some of my comments fail to mention intentionally is that today and for years, Chicago gets roughly $650 million of extra payments every year outside of the normal education funding formula. They get a special deal. That's part of the quid pro quo for the certain pension treatment. They don't like to talk about that, but that needs to be in the context of overall reform. We do want Chicago treated like every other city and every other school district. That's fair and that's appropriate for the taxpayers of Chicago, just like it is for the taxpayers throughout the state of Illinois. And for those who say, I'm too hard on the city of Chicago, I should be doing more to help because Chicago's in crisis, let me be clear. I'm in office 7 months. I didn't create this mess. This is years in the making by the State General Assembly and by the leaders in Chicago. We're going to fix it. I'm going to help them fix it. But this is a two-way partnership. And for those who wonder whether I love the city of Chicago and I will bend over backwards to help, let me be clear. I have dedicated personal resources and time to help Chicago Public Schools for 25 years. I want the best schools in America here in Chicago. And to me, it's an outrage that the families of this city should face larger class sizes, loss of key talented teachers and personnel because of mismanagement of the financial situation of the schools. It's outrageous. We need to fix it. And to fix it, we need to empower our elected officials and our local voters to get a control on their costs and their spending. That's the key to our reform, and that's what we're asking for.
Governor,
with that, I'll turn it over for questions. Yes.
Thank you. You said in private conversations have been constructive, but in public they are not. Can you elaborate on that specifically?
Well, again, I don't want to break confidences of what's said in private, but, you know, politicians sometimes will say conflicting things. And we've made some progress in private, but and then in public it gets criticized or rolled back. And time matters. We've got to move past this posturing and game playing. Let's get on with things. We've laid out an agenda. We've taken many things off the table of negotiation. I'm willing to take some more off the table. We've got to move along.
Can you give us an example of one of those things where in private it was going in a good, healthy direction and publicly it falls apart?
Well, I'll say this. I thought the school's chief, Claypool, it was interesting. He made a comment yesterday about, well, bringing collective bargaining or labor issues into the negotiations around financial reforms not helpful, or I didn't get his exact quote, but somebody told me that. And when I read it, I said, well, we've been having these for a while, here's a simple. I'll say his statement sounds maybe factually accurate because to the degree that Speaker Madigan refuses to discuss collective bargaining issues, that prevents this city from fixing its financial problems. So maybe that's an accurate statement. But the fact is, the city has already requested collective bargaining reforms in order to fix their problem, and that's what's not being acknowledged, and it should be acknowledged. It's time to move along. We got to stop hiding. Let's lay it out there. And I realize, these are powerful special interests. Folks don't want to necessarily take them on, and they want others to take them on. I'm willing to take them on, and people are asking me to, but this is a two-way street. We've got to be partners.
Governor, you said yesterday that it was CPS that asked to take pensions out of collective bargaining. CPS says they did not ask. So who exactly asked you, and is there a bill? What when you say they asked?
I'll ask our staff to get you the background on that, because I want to be sensitive to. I don't want to throw certain people under the bus, but it's been requested.
Is it time
Yes.
to send in Jim Riley, the maker of many compromises?
That's an interesting question. I like Jim. I know him pretty well. I'm not sure that he's necessarily the right person right now, but I mean, any and all help would be good. We've got to get something done here.
Yesterday, the credit rating agency.
Given Cullerton's bill and where things have gone with the CPS money, what if you don't get collective bargaining? What if this is the best offer that you get on the property tax rates?
Well, so we've requested a handful of fundamental reforms, and we're in a position where we're not demanding every one of them, but we've introduced 6 bills: significant pension reform, term limits, redistricting reform, workers' comp reform, tort reform, and a property tax freeze with local control. We've introduced 6 bills. We're willing to be in a place where we don't get all 6. We need to negotiate that in good faith. Right now it's happening with certain folks, but not with the Speaker. And we need to get with the Speaker on that.
Yesterday, the credit rating agencies severely downgraded the McCormick bonds. What are you doing to ensure that the state's credit rating is not going to get downgraded because of the budget impasse?
The downgrade is a direct result of the financial mismanagement and the impasse. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't get something done that there'll be more of that. It's highly appropriate. That's just an indication of the lack of good financial management, the lack of structural reform. See, what folks have got to remember, there's a lot of pressure right now. Let's solve the problem only by raising taxes. There's a lot of folks who just want to raise taxes. I understand that. That's an easier way out than taking on some special interest groups. But let's be clear. New Jersey has already raised their taxes. They have some of the highest income taxes in America, and they have the highest property taxes with us. They aren't paying their pensions now. They got a big debt and deficit just like us. They haven't fixed their problem, and they're in financial duress. The state of Connecticut, they have brutally high income tax. They have high property tax. They've already gone where people are encouraging us to go. They're not paying their pensions. They've got a huge unfunded pension liability and big deficit. We have to take on the structure of the problem, empower local voters if we're going to fix it. That's what folks in Illinois are afraid to do. That's what Speaker Madigan is resisting doing, but that's the only way to fix our problem and to prevent future credit downgrades. Look at New Jersey. They have their credit's been hurt, their credit rating. They already have taken the high income taxes. We can't just raise taxes to fix the problem.
But that would satisfy the credit agency. So what's worse, raising revenue, raising taxes, or getting a downgrade?
I don't work for credit rating agencies. I work for the people of Illinois. And we are going to have a healthy state with a booming economy, rising wages, jobs for everybody, value for taxpayers, and the best schools in America. And we're going to start to end this corruption. Here's one thing I'd like you to emphasize today, too. President Obama did us all a big favor, I think, here in Illinois. When he was speaking in Africa recently, I saw an article summarizing his speech, and I asked for a copy of the speech because I'd like to read it. I'd like to understand every word he said. But he said specifically, Africa has suffered for years with significant government corruption and self-dealing, and not unlike his home state and his home city. And then he went on to say, we have term limits in America. I could run again and win, but you know what? I can't run again because we have term limits. And you know what? It's a good thing that new leaders can come up. Fresh ideas can emerge. Term limits serve America well. You should have term limits in Africa to help you deal with your corruption and end your corruption. Think about that statement and think about what's gone on in Illinois and the city of Chicago and Springfield for years. One of the reasons we need term limits is to end this cycle of corruption and bring different people, new ideas, end the cycle of self-dealing, and that's a very important part of our reform.
Governor, you talk a lot about Speaker Madigan and special interests. Aren't you really talking about the unions, the trade unions even, when you talk about prevailing wage, and of course the public sector unions here?
Well, they're part of the issue. This is about empowering local voters, residents, taxpayers. The government should belong to them. They're the ones who should decide these things. Right now, they're not being allowed to decide. That's what this is really about. It's local control, empowering the people of Illinois to control their own governments and their own schools. That's the essence.
The organized labor in this case?
It's part of the problem, but the issue is empowering local voters and local residents. That's the essence of our reform, and that's what we need to do. We empower voters with term limits, with redistricting reform, with local control of collective bargaining and prevailing wage, and we empower our small business owners to be able to compete through workers' comp reform and tort reform. Booming economy, empowering voters. Yes, yes.
Time matters, and yet you went ahead and you did give the education budget. So as far as the schools, they're not in a crisis right this moment. They're okay for a while. Would it have been perhaps better to have held off and forced perhaps them to come together? I mean, it seems as if there's some time here. You say time matters, but really there is some time.
Our school funding, and I'm disappointed in the legislature, I wanted to even put more money into our schools. So in terms of me authorizing that one appropriation, relatively easy to do because I still think we don't fund our schools enough in Illinois. And I want to increase general revenue support for schools, and I want to disproportionately give it to low-income districts, including the city of Chicago. So that was relatively easy for me to do. And I will do everything I can never to hold school children hostage. Education is the most important thing we do as a community, and we have got to do more to help improve our schools.
Governor, is it time to go over the...
Excuse me just a second.
Governor, what did you make of, in the middle of all this budget posturing, Representative Lou Lang was one of the speaker's top lieutenants asking your administration for his job?
It's Illinois. You know, I mean, I didn't even know. I mean, I heard that he did that. I didn't even know. You know, it's just it's part of the culture here. It's part of the reason that we're in such deep yogurt.
Since it's part
Yes.
of the culture, as you just said, is it time to go over the heads of Speaker Madigan, President Colton, and talk directly to the people about these structural reforms, about taking pensions and other issues out of the local government collective bargaining, reforming and redistricting, term limits, workers' comp? Shouldn't you be giving a speech directly to the people of Illinois, not through the media? Take out 15 minutes, go by 15 minutes of time to lay out your case.
Well, it's certainly it's certainly an idea that I can get you with our communications team to discuss. But it's your point's valid. We're trying to get our, I'm here meeting with you. You are the primary conduit to the the people of Illinois, and I'm speaking with you and letting you ask the questions and go deep on issues so you can inform the residents. Will we try to go direct? Will we try to use television and mailers to communicate to? We'll try to do that as well. Yes.
Governor, yesterday when we spoke with Forrest Claypool, I think he said at least 4 times that he is counting on you to help CPS get out of its mess. No matter what we said to him about what's in their control, he said he's counting on you, meaning you personally. What's your rejoinder to that?
Well, I don't need a rejoinder. We have a very good working relationship. I am a big Forrest Claypool fan. I think he's a terrific guy. I've known him for years. I've worked with him. I've supported him. He's extremely talented, and everything I know, he's a man of high integrity. And Chicago does need some state help because of the situation that they're in, and I'm willing to help. I've said I'm willing to help, and as I started at the beginning of our discussion here today, there has not been a single request that Forrest or the mayor have made of me who I haven't said, okay, I'm going to try to deliver that. There's not a single one where I've said, just no way, I would never support you on that. They may make some request in the future where I'll say that, but I haven't said it yet. And there's a pretty long list of where I've said yes. And I've gone to them and I've said, Forrest, Mr. Mayor, help us. And don't just say some of the ideas are good in private. Let's go. Time.
So are you in effect negotiating right now with him?
We're negotiating 24/7.
Through us. I mean, are you sending him the
Well,
message that you're open? You just need him to move a little bit to your side. Is that what you're saying?
well, I don't know if a little bit. I would say we've got to work together, and this is a bipartisan, good government reform. The city needs to help the state. The city. Look at the mayor is very powerful in the legislature, more than folks like to talk about. And Speaker Madigan is right out of the Chicago machine. I mean, there is no more Chicago than Mike Madigan. Chicago basically controls the legislature. Chicago's running the state. They're controlling our budget. Chicago is powerful. As I said yesterday, and I will always say, Chicago is an important community. I love Chicago. I was born here. I will do everything I can to help Chicago. But Chicago shouldn't run the state. The state should be run for the benefit of everybody, not disproportionately Chicago. Chicago's always getting special deals. And I want to help Chicago, but we need the state to get benefits. And Chicago politicians are blocking reforms for the state, reforms that the rest of the state wants, but Speaker Madigan's not willing to give them. He's willing to give collective bargaining changes for the city if the city asks. If Democrats in Chicago ask for it, he says, okay, I'll do that for you. The state, I'm trying to get it for every community in the state. I work for every community in every resident of the state. I ask for that on behalf of the state, and he says, "Oh, I can't talk about that. That's not related to the budget." Come on, we got to end this. Yes.
Governor, the layoffs at DNR, is that a sign of things to come for state workers? Are you considering more layoffs in the workforce?
We are managing as best we can with no budget and dire financial circumstances. We're doing the best we can. We don't want to have layoffs, but we're managing the best we can. Thanks very much, everybody.